In section 5.4, we're going to learn how to multiply fractions. Now, the good news is multiplying and dividing fractions is so much easier than adding and subtracting fractions. So, if you thought the last couple sections were a little tough, it should get a little bit easier in the next couple days. Okay, to multiply fractions and mixed numbers, here's the 3 steps we're going to take. We first need to change any mixed numbers into improper fractions. After that, we're going to take the product of the numerators over the product of the denominators. And then step 3, we always want to simplify. Okay, let's go ahead and dive right into some examples. I only have 6 of them for you today, so split your paper into 6 equal sections. Okay, first one. Let's look at 4 over 15 times 5 over 8. Now in those 3 steps, there's one step that I left out, but it kind of makes your life easier, and that step is to cross-reduce. What cross-reduce means is you are going to look along your diagonals, and you're going to look if there's anything that those numbers have in common. So if I start here with 5 and 15, I notice that they have a 5 in common. So I'm going to divide out a 5 from both of those numbers. 5 divided by 5 gives me 1. 15 divided by 5 gives me 3. I'm going to do the same thing with my other diagonal. I'm asking myself, do 4 and 8 have anything in common? And I know that they have a 4 in common. 4 divided by 4 gives me 1. 8 divided by 4 gives me 2. Now I have 1 over 3 times 1 over 2. And now I can go ahead and follow those steps that were up there. I'm going to take the product of my numerators. So I'm going to take 1 times 1 over the product of my denominators, which is 3 times 2. So my final answer would be 1 over 6, which cannot be simplified. Okay, let's try negative 6 over 7 times negative 21 over 22. First thing I look for, if I know I have positive and negatives, if I have a negative times a negative, I know a negative times a negative gives me a positive answer. Once I recognize that, I'm going to cross out those negative signs because they're not really doing a whole lot except getting in the way. Okay, I'm going to look on my diagonals, see if there's anything I can divide out in common. 6 and 22, they do have one number in common. I can divide out a 2 from both of those numbers. 22 divided by 2 gives me 11. 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. I'm going to look on my other diagonal. I'm going to ask myself, do 7 and 21 have anything in common? And they do. They have a 7 in common. 7 divided by 7 gives me 1. 21 divided by 7 gives me 3. Now I can multiply my numerators, so I have 3 times 3, which gives me 9. I can multiply my denominators. I get 1 times 11, which gives me 11. 9 over 11 is in simplest form because 9 and 11 have no common factors. Okay, I'm going to give you guys one to work out on your own. I want you to try 3/4 over negative 12. If you want a hint, you might try writing negative 12 as a fraction. When I multiplied those two fractions, I ended up with negative 9 over 1, which I then simplified to just 9. Okay, let's look at some that have mixed numbers now. First one, if I have 4 and 1/4 times negative 3 and 1/5. That first step, which we haven't had to do yet, told me that I needed to change any mixed numbers into improper fractions. So I need to change 4 and 1/4 into an improper fractions. Remember, that's where we do this circle. So I'm going to start by taking 4 times 4, which gives me 16. Then I'm going to add 1. 16 plus 1 gives me 17. We keep the denominator. So 4 and 1/4 is an improper fraction, gives me 17 over 4. For my second fraction, I notice I have a negative. Doesn't really mean a whole lot except whatever that improper fraction is, it's going to be negative. I'm going to do my circle for this one as well. So 3 times 5 gives me 15. 15 plus 1 gives me 16. Keep the denominator, so I get negative 16 over 5. Before I multiply, I want to check my diagonals, and I notice here I can divide out a 4 from both of those numbers. The 16 turns into a 4, the 4 turns into a 1. Okay, so when I'm ready to multiply my numerators, I have 17 times 4, which gives me 68. I have 68 over, and then 1 times 5 gives me a 5. And don't forget, from the very beginning, I had a positive number times a negative number. So I know that my answer is going to be negative. And we never want to leave our answer like this. We want to make sure we change it into a mixed number. So 5 will go into 68 13 times, I believe. And there will be 3 as a remainder. And my denominator stays the same. So my answer would be negative 13 3/5. I'm going to give you one to try out. Let's have you try negative 3 3/5 times negative 1 5/9. So I would first give you the hint to figure out what sign your answer is going to be, whether it's going to be positive or negative. Then change your mixed numbers to improper fractions, cross reduce, and multiply. The very, very first thing that I noticed with my answer, even before I even started working at it, is I know I have a negative times a negative, and you notice I did end up with a positive number. Okay, and then I changed my mixed numbers into improper fractions, got 18 over 5, 14 over 9. I divided out of 9, and when I multiplied, I got 28 over 5. That, as a mixed number, should be 5 3/8. The last type of problem looks just a little bit different, and there's really just one extra step. Let's look at negative 9 x to the third over 4 times a negative 8x over 3. Aside from them throwing in some variables, we do this the exact same way. Now, the first thing I look at is I have a negative number times a negative number. Anytime I multiply a negative times a negative, I get a positive answer. Once I recognize that, I am going to ignore those negative signs because they are just getting in the way. Just like I said, you work these out the exact same way. So you want to start by looking on your diagonals and saying if there's anything that you can divide out in common. So if I look along this diagonal, I notice that they have a 3 in common. So I'm going to divide out a 3. On the other diagonal, I can divide out a 4. Once I cross reduce, I'm going to multiply my numerators. So I have 3x to the third times 2x. And I'm going to multiply my denominators, and I get 1 times 1, which just gives me 1. And I want to make sure I simplify this as much as I can. 3x to the third times 2x squared. I can take the 3 times 2, which gives me 6. X to the third times x gives me x to the fourth. So my answer would be 6x to the fourth.